problem is that when you take out the high testosterone, all of a sudden that buffer towards the internal effects of that cortisol and stress is gone. Sometimes having that confidence and just feeling like a stronger, better erection can get rid of that, you know, negative voice inside of the head to allow that situation to work out properly.
So what are the testosterone side effects or TRT side effects that you see most often, and how can we resolve those?
From a really kind of basic standpoint, the most common side effect that we'd see from testosterone would be symptoms that would be estrogenic symptoms, what people would typically call. And what's happening is that we are taking an amount of testosterone and we're either putting in too much too quickly, which up until I went to the Olympia the other day, I spoke the year before and then I spoke this year. I'm just in a really good echo chamber of like TRT practitioners and clinics, but I was speaking to people about how like doing like 2 to 3 injections a week with like little insulin syringes, like microdosing it that way. And the looks I was getting from people was like I was like delivering the prophecy. And I was like, how this was like common practice like 5 years ago. So if your protocol's off, you're going to have a bad time. But if your internal health is off, you're going to have a bad time as well. So what we talk about a lot in TRT and also in anabolic steroids, which is not really a space I'm in, but I've kind of in it by association, is this concept of supraphysiological. And the problem is, if you take a guy who's, let's say, 250 pounds, drinking alcohol, he's got fatty liver disease, he's insulin resistant, he's living like shit. If you take him to the top of the reference range, that's fucking supraphysiological for him. Because there is no way someone in that state of health would be making that much testosterone. So the problem is, kind of going to this conversation we're having before, is that we've decided that there's this physiological range for everyone. And we're going, oh, well, as long as you're in that, then you won't be having any issues. I can say, sure as shit, that the physiological range for a 21-year-old athlete who's living like a saint and the physiological range for a 60-year-old who's living like a dickhead is completely different. And what happens is if we go super physiological, and especially if we're giving doses in levels that create these waves of fluctuations, which men don't do well with, we create this scenario where the body has, again, in this kind of system that we've got, like the human body, we've got too much of this precursor to metabolize properly, so the body is going to shuttle it down the aromatase pathway. And the reason why it's doing that at an upregulated rate rather than putting it down the correct ratio of estrogen to DHT is because that process is driven by inflammation. So what's happening is your body is going, nah, you're sick, this is not good, slow down your testosterone production, we need to focus on survival. And then the individual's coming in going, oh, you're pumping the brakes and I don't like how that feels, so I'm going to come in and pump the accelerator and we're just going to move ahead and have a grand old time. It doesn't work. It's stuttery. You get bumps, you get side effects because you're not working with the body, you're working against it. So a lot of the problems that we're seeing with TRT is, one, the protocol's off, which it's a simple fix. But two, when the protocol's good, but the individual's still having a bad response, it's because their body is too systemically inflamed to tolerate the amount of testosterone that they're taking. And that's when it can be a matter of going, okay, what's the underlying root problem? Because a lot of people have issues they don't realize. They don't realize that they're 10% body fat too heavy. They don't realize that they have fatty liver disease, that they have hypothyroidism, that you can't drink, 3-4 standard drinks a few times a week and be healthy. They're not realizing that. So when you've got these problems and then you're putting in the optimal healthy amount of testosterone, you're putting healthy testosterone into an unhealthy body and you're getting side effects. And that's what happens.
Gotcha. What about sexual health?
I think sexual health's tricky because sexual health is something that carries a lot of vulnerability. It's hugely dependent on another party, which is the partner. And when you take into account psychological vulnerability and the variable of the relationship and the partner, you create a situation that the practitioner only has a very limited scope over what they can control. Mm-hmm. So I see a lot of guys thinking they have erectile dysfunction because they can't get it up for some trash they met on Tinder 3 hours ago. That's not erectile dysfunction. Like that's not a medical condition. If you don't know the girl and you can't get an erection, you don't need a pill. You need to go out for coffee. I think that's something which I'm seeing a lot of is guys are expecting to have porn star stage performance because they've got X amount of testosterone. Doesn't work like that. You can still be self-conscious, and that will still create a stress response. The more stressed you are, the blood goes away from your extremities. The penis is an extremity. You lose your erection.
But we could also say that the stress can also come from things that aren't necessarily self-conscious, right?
Like biological stresses.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of stuff that will cause these stresses, and I think that this is where sexual function is something that's really difficult to troubleshoot, because we can biological fix the foundation. Like younger guys, unless you're really overweight, you shouldn't have a blood flow problem. But if you've got a low androgen problem, the situation is not only are you low in sex drive, but you're low in that internal buffer against the stress response. A lot of the time, guys with low testosterone still jerk off all the fucking time. The problem is that when your testosterone is low, you're not making the thing internally that blocks the effects of cortisol and adrenaline. So, for example, if you're, let's say you bring home a lady that you're particularly attracted to, that's supposed to create a bunch of sensations: excitement, lust, arousal, but also a degree of, I'm self-conscious, what's my performance going to be like, these kind of things. But this is meant to drastically outweigh this. This kind of excitement, arousal, sexually turned on, confidence, bravery, all this stuff, that's meant to outshadow that kind of lingering, second guessing in the back of your head. Once you get going, it all goes away. The problem is that when you take out the high testosterone, all of a sudden that buffer towards the internal effects of that cortisol and stress is gone. So those cortisol and adrenaline molecules are going to be much more active at the receptor sites. So you're going to have a much stronger stress response in any given situation. So not only can this lead to performance anxiety, but it will also lead to guys going, oh, I don't want to take that risk. I don't want to go for that business opportunity. I don't want to go for that thing that's outside my comfort zone. I'm too scared. Because they don't have that internal buffer that's supposed to make you go, yeah, I am scared. Yeah, this stuff is real, but the reward is greater than the risk. And when you get rid of that body's ability to be able to have that internal buffer against stress, the behavioral outcomes of that and the subjective outcomes change. And I think that could also lead to a lot of performance anxiety, because you don't have that lust and that passion and that drive. So unless, guys are very, very comfortable with their partner, then yeah, they're going to get a big stress response. Sexual performance goes to shit.
Okay. And, there could be, I would actually be interested in just discussing a variety of reasons why this stress could happen, or why these things could happen. Because I don't think any guy really feels comfortable saying or considering themselves as self-conscious, or sometimes it might be hard for someone to admit something like that.
If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
There's some interesting correlations between how self-conscious someone is and their IQ. People who are smarter tend to be more self-aware, and people who are lower IQ tend to be more confident. It's like ignorance is bliss.
Right.
And a lot of this stuff, I think people get caught up in their heads about. So, and it's kind of like when people go to start TRT. It's supposed to be a big deal. You're supposed to be nervous about it. So when it comes to intimacy and things like this, I think it's important to recognize that this is a very intimate, personal act between two people, and people should take it seriously. And I think that's important. But when it comes to what the stresses can be, I think particularly if you've been on a losing streak, like if you've been in a situation where you've lost your erection in intimacy and it's led to a negative experience, let's say she gets offended, you get embarrassed, whatever can happen in that scenario, depending on the emotional maturity of both parties. I think if that's your basal point of reference for intimacy, that can set you up for a losing streak. And the example that I use for this, and it's if anyone's a boxer and you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I know it doesn't make any sense. It's not a literal analogy, but if you take two boxers, one who's never won a fight and one who's won every fight, and let's say for some reason they're going to have a match. When that walkout music is playing, and when you've got the crowd's cheering and everything's going on, The guy who's won every fight, he's going to associate that experience with victory, conquest, knocking the other guy out, winning. So that association, he's going to go, okay, these butterflies in my stomach, this tightness in my chest, this is associated with like excitement and, going and doing something really fantastic and big and riveting. Whereas the guy who's lost every fight, he's associating that experience with, I'm going to get knocked out, I'm going to lose, I'm going to be embarrassed, it's going to hurt.
Yeah.
But it's the same physiological sensation of the tightness in the stomach, the butterflies, the sweating, the heart rate. So the problem is if a guy's had a losing streak where he's lost his erections, when he gets into that intimacy setting again, all those biological triggers are now going to be associated with a negative psychological outcome. And that's going to just flood that stress cascade.
Gotcha.
Because once you have a big stress response, cortisol's got a half-life of like 40 minutes. So if you've dumped a whole bunch of stress in that scenario, unless she gives you a really good massage and plays some really it can be difficult to come back from that.
Gotcha. That reminds me of like the stress is success mindset that Huberman has discussed.
Yep.
You familiar with that?
Yep.
Do you happen to have any ways that you would recommend that somebody or a man like get to that point? Because it's easier said than done to just be like, oh, think positively, or
Yeah. I think the healthiest way and the correct answer to the question is to have a discussion with a partner that you love and trust and tell them what's going on and work through it. That's the correct answer. It's not always an answer that works, but that's the optimal outcome, is just talking about it and healing with it experientially. That's not always an option for people though, and I understand why that is. So this is something that I think people can biohack. And obviously having a good, healthy testosterone level is a good foundation for this. But when we look at something like Cialis, tadalafil, or short-acting version Viagra, which I don't recommend, but if we look at Cialis, what Cialis is, it's basically like a cock ring that's internal. It's not giving you an erection. It's not making you aroused. It's trapping the blood in the erection once that process has begun. So it's not going to create an erection. It's going to maintain the erection. So Cialis is not clinically effective in any studies for performance anxiety, erectile dysfunction. But in practice, it is. Because what's happening is if you as a guy, you're in a scenario when you're worried about losing your erection, but it feels like really strong and dense and engorged because you've taken something like Cialis, that's kind of going to be like someone, again, going back to the boxing analogy, who's like rooting in your corner, being like, nah, you've got this, you can do this is going to be easy. So sometimes having that confidence and just feeling like a stronger, better erection can get rid of that negative voice inside of the head to allow that situation to work out properly. So sometimes it's just a matter of using Cialis until you get yourself on a winning streak. And then once that winning streak becomes your default, then you're not going to worry about it anymore. And I think in scenarios like that, 5 milligrams of Cialis, that's going to be like having a light beer trying to get drunk. Like, it's just not enough. So I think in those situations, like 20 is good. 40's been studied safely, but 10 to 20 is what I'd be looking at for something like that. And another thing that works very well from a supplemental standpoint, because a lot of the sedative supplements will either impact erection performance negatively, or they can be like phytoestrogens or whatever. But the one supplement that works really well, all my listeners are sick of me talking about this. I've done so many lectures on it. I use it for everything. Phosphatidylserine inhibits the response of the adrenaline production to the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that signals the adrenal glands. And this is actually tested in athletes. They put them on a stress test, they make them run, and the group of athletes who don't take the supplement produce a stress response. The ones who take the phosphatidylserine don't produce a stress response. So if you take like a clinical dose, which is like 600 milligrams, I recommend the Thorne one. If you've got an affiliate company that makes them, recommend that one. The Thorne one works well. The Jarrow one works well, but like 600 milligrams of that with like 20 milligrams of tadalafil prior to intimacy, and using that until it's no longer needed so you get on a winning streak, that's how you can get out of that.
There was something that I heard you discussing that I'm very interested in talking about. So things that guys may be taking or may be on that might be affecting their sexual health or sexual performance. And I also remember that I believe we were discussing things that block the 5-alpha reductase conversion to DHT.
Yep.
Also. And this is something that I like discussing a lot as well, because I know that there's a wide variety of different responses from men.
Yep. Okay. So preface is I've got a really great, we called it a debate, but it's more just two friends presenting different ideas. But I've got a video with Dr. Kyle Gillette on the TRT and hormone optimization channel where we're talking about the different sides of the 5-alpha reductase inhibitor argument, and I'm quite against them. But he presented a really good argument, maybe not for them, but for the people who are wanting to use them. My general philosophy when it comes to troubleshooting sexual performance with supplements is when in doubt, take it out. So the first thing you want to do is just go through what is every supplement and medication that I'm taking that is not necessary and stop taking that. And 90% of the time that will fix it. Because someone could be that 1 in 100 where you hyper respond to some flavonoid or whatever that's in curcumin, ashwagandha, fucking ginseng, whatever. So if you're taking a bunch of different supplements and a bunch of different pre-workouts and intra-workouts and post-workouts that have got all these different ingredients, just stop taking all of them for like a couple of weeks and see if it gets better. And then you can create a process of elimination, like what you were talking about with elimination before.
What type of ingredients, though, in more particular?
Typically botanicals. Botanicals are the supplement ingredient that causes the most variability across the board is botanicals. So for example, if I take 100 guys and I'm like, hey, I want to improve their sleep. If I give 100 guys magnesium, I'm going to get probably 90 guys get at least some degree of moving in the right direction because it's a fucking electrolyte. If you give 100 guys ashwagandha or 100 guys valerian or chamomile, you're going to get a massively varying response. Some really, really good, some really, really bad, but a whole bunch of side effects, a whole bunch of non-responders, some guys being like, it kept me up. This is because botanicals have so many different bioavailable and bioactive compounds in them that interact with a laundry list of systems in the body. Systems. So if you go on like examine.com and look at like any of these, like chamomile, valerian, ginseng, anything, you can see that there are compounds and constituents in there that interact with virtually every different system in the body. So if you're taking like a cocktail of just a whole bunch of stuff, it's basically just like a lottery as to whether it's going to do you favors or not. So I think cutting out everything that's not essential, but especially botanicals. So when I say botanicals, I mean anything plant-based, herbal, any of those extracts, things like that. Drop them all out. And then if they're working for you, you can put them back in. But that's a good thing to look at. The other ones that will impact sexual performance, so yeah, anything that will inhibit the conversion to DHT. For guys who don't react well to them, HCG, DHEA, pregnenolone can cause problems for some guys as well, but can be a miracle for others. Anything that in isolation increases serotonin, so SSRIs, tryptophan, 5-HTP, those can all cause issues for guys as well. A lot of supplements will do more harm than good from a sexual performance standpoint, unless we're talking about a very small list of things like creatine, protein powder, collagen powder, liver capsules, things like that are relatively benign across the board. I'd say that most supplements can be a curveball for sexual performance.
Gotcha. Interesting.
Stop doing all the things you know you shouldn't be doing and start doing all the things you know you should be doing. If people are looking for where to start, it's that. Testosterone is what creates confidence. It's what gives the capacity for leadership. It's what drives the ability for one to become courageous and competent in their skill set. If you go on TRT and then live a lifestyle that you would never have those levels in the first place, your blood's going to get really